Hello, I'm Ollie, and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, everything I read in October, which is quite heavy. So yes, 22 books read in October, most of them physical, so that was quite a heavy stack to be holding at the start of the video. So I will talk to you about all of them. I'm going to do them as I did in my last monthly wrap-up video, in the order that I read them, and at the end I will tell you my book of the month. So you can stay tuned to the end to look out for that should you want to. So my main focus this month in October was Occult Detective October, which I was one of the co-hosts of. So a fantastic new reading event created by MJ from the channel Reading This Life, where we read Occult Detective books. Occult detectives being detectives who investigate supernatural goings on and things like that. So I read some really enjoyable books for that. There were weekly prompts for the 4 weeks. So the first week was vintage occult detective fiction, so stuff published before 1960. Second week was modern, so stuff published after 1960. Third week was read a book by a diverse author or with a diverse main character in the occult detective genre. And then the fourth week was anything goes. So I had read stuff for all of those. I think I read probably 6 or 7 occult detective books in the end. So I'll flag those as we go through this and let you know that I read them for Occult Detective October, but participated in a few other things as well. So buddy reads. I read a book for a romance reading event called Witches Need Love Too, and also read The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, which was part of the Classics and Company group that's reading various classic books. So anyway, let me crack on and go through and show you what I read. So the first things I finished this month were 2 manga volumes, the Hellbound 1 and the Hellbound 2. These were very kindly sent to me by one of my viewers and patrons, Lel. So thanks again for these, Lel. So Lel sent these to me saying she thought they were interesting but not great, and that was kind of my assessment of them as well. So an interesting concept, the concept being that people start getting this notification on their phones that there's like a countdown to a 0 hour, and at that 0 hour demons come and take them to hell. So it's kind of an intriguing concept, and it's about the impact that has on society, particularly Korean society, and also the lives of some individual characters. So there were some moments of real tension within this book, or within these volumes. But at the same time, it felt like the ideas could have been developed a bit more, and there could have been more of a kind of cohesive plot to all of it. So enjoyed, but didn't love those two. Next up, then we have the first thing I read for Occult Detective October. So this is actually a modern occult detective fiction book, but I read it in the vintage month. Vintage week. I did read a vintage one as well. So this was Already Dead by Charlie Huston, the first of his Joe Pitt series of novels. So Joe Pitt is a vampire detective going up against all different sorts of monsters and things like that. So in this first book, I'm trying to remember what the plot was now, and I can't remember. I think it had like a fairly standard kind of noirish detective type plot to it, which was quite enjoyable. What I felt it lacked was a real connection between his existence as a vampire and the actual storyline. So it was almost like it was set against, it was a normal detective type story set against the backdrop of a society where an America basically where vampires and humans coexist. So it was a fun, entertaining read, quite gritty and violent at times, but again not amazing, not fantastic. Next up then, something far less enjoyable, The End of Alice by A.M. Holmes. So I've done a review of this, which went up last week. Read this for my Disturbing Books project, and again this was a buddy read. Oh, sorry, no, I should have said Already Dead. I did as a buddy read with MJ, the host of Occult Detective October, or the creator of Occult Detective October. So The End of Alice I did as a buddy read with Anne from the channel Anne Novella, and one of my viewers, Wilhelmina, and this is really horrible book, a troubling book, but not, I felt, a successful book. So it's a book about a convicted child murderer and paedophile who's in prison, who has a correspondence relationship with a young woman who is also a paedophile, and it's about the crimes he committed. So kind of the backstory of those crimes and how he ended up in prison, and also about ongoing crimes that this young woman is committing, ongoing abuse. So really disturbing. But I didn't understand why A.M. Holmes had chosen to write it, I guess. It felt like a book with no point other than her trying to, get into the minds of these people, and therefore felt to me like a bit of a pointless book. I was not a huge fan of that book by any means. Right, next then, the vintage Occult Detective book I read for Occult Detective October. So this is one of the kind of foundational works of the genre. Carnacki, the Ghost Finder by William Hope Hodgson, which is a collection of short stories about this character, Carnacki, the Ghost Finder, who is an archetypal occult detective. So, goes to different haunted houses to try and figure out what's going on, basically. So just a really, really entertaining read. I had a really good time with it. Really inventive, really cool. So I can't remember exactly when it was written. I think it was written just after the end of, just after Queen Victoria's death. So moving into the kind of Edwardian period. But has got a really cool, almost like a bit of a steampunk vibe to it, even though it's not science fiction at all, in that Carnacki uses these like electric pentacles to try and contain the ghosts and things like that. So it was just really cool, fun, entertaining, slightly pulpy but very creative horror fiction. Really, really, really enjoyed that one. Next then, for the Witches Need Love 2 readathon, I read Saving Marina by Lauri Robinson, which is a Harlequin or Mills and Boon romance set during the Salem witch trials. So about this young woman, Marina, who people think is locals think may be a witch, and her romance with this sturdy sea captain who's got a beard I am now in my shaven state envying. So yeah, just a fun romance. It's a bit longer than category romances normally are, and a bit longer than it needed to be, I would argue. Could have done with maybe a third lopped off, but still a fun, enjoyable romance. So had fun with that one. Next then, another one for Occult Detective October, and this one I read for the modern week, albeit it's got a historic setting, but a book that only came out, I think, either this year or last year. Yeah, last year, 2022. So The Stone of Destiny by Andrew Neil Macleod, the second in his Johnson and Boswell series, where Dr. Johnson and Boswell are occult detectives. So this one, and this was, I thought, really entertainingly set up. So they are travelling round Scotland trying to find the true Stone of Destiny, which is something I was kind of vaguely aware of, but it's the Coronation Stone, which is in Westminster Abbey, which came from Scotland originally. So the suggestion in this book is that the one that's actually in Westminster Abbey is a fake, and they're trying to find the real one. So they travel around Scotland, but in doing so, a bit like Carnacki, visit various different places and encounter weird goings on there, and try and get to the bottom of them. So just again, quite a pulpy feel to it, but just there's something about Andrew Neil Macleod's writing that just really connects with me. It's just fun. He's got really, weaves really fun ideas into what he's doing, and just writes very, very entertaining books. So this is effectively kind of a collection of short stories, but with this overarching kind of road movie type story tying them together. So enjoyed that a lot. Next, another horror novel, another horror book, but one that's a bit more serious, I guess, certainly less amusing. The Hollow Kind by Andy Davidson. So I read this as a buddy read with Sammy, one of my patrons. So this is a really creepy, atmospheric horror story set across 3 time periods, and really effectively done. So the kind of central monsters and things like this in this book are really creepy, and it's one of those books where you've got that wonderful sense of not really knowing if what you're witnessing is actually going on or not. So yeah, it's again maybe a bit longer than it needed to be. It's 450 pages. Maybe didn't need to be 450 pages, but a really entertaining, atmospheric, creepy horror read nevertheless. Next then, another buddy read. So this was a buddy read with Ellis, one of my patrons, completely different and really fun. So this is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. So a very entertaining book, set in the 50s, or no, early 60s, set in the early 60s, about this female chemist who doesn't get taken seriously by her peers, and indeed is subject to lots of sexism in the workplace and actual sexual abuse as well. Who ends up getting a job working as a TV cook on a TV show, and becomes like an inspirational figure for women across America as a result. It was just really, really entertaining. I felt like it got a bit too complicated in terms of it kind of tied itself up in knots a bit with some plot stuff at the end, but overall a really uplifting book, very amusing at times. There was like some laugh out loud funny bits. And quite moving at times as well. Again, really, really enjoyed it. Next then, a classic. So this was my group read for my patrons this month. So we do a group read every month. This month we read Dracula by Bram Stoker. So appropriate for Occult Detective October, because Van Helsing is effectively an occult detective. So I don't need to tell you the plot of Dracula. What I probably do need to tell you, if you haven't read it, is it's really, really accessible. So for a book of its age, it's a really fun read, told as kind of diary entries and letters and things like that, which always keeps the voice fresh, if you like. And there's some really good scenes of horror in this book as well. Some really effective set piece scenes. So I had a great time rereading this. Really thoroughly enjoyed it. Okay, next then, a couple more for Occult Detective October. So for the Diverse Authors Week, and we chose to have that Diverse Authors Week because obviously the origins of occult detective fiction are very much kind of in the Victorian era, with white guys, middle-aged white guys, people like me writing these stories. So it felt important to read a bit more broadly than that, and not just have a diet of stories of that type. So we read, or I read from the tour, I think it's called Discovering Lovecraft or Reinventing Lovecraft collection, which is fantastic. So it's got 4 novellas in it by modern authors, all of which take Lovecraftian themes and redevelop them. So I read a couple from that. So I read Hands on Bone by Cassandra Khaw, which was a fun, a bit like the Joe Pitt book, combines kind of pulpy like detective fiction style tropes with horror. So this one, with some creepy Lovecraftian horror. So that was a fun novella. And then also read, and I didn't enjoy this one quite as much, Agents of Dreamland by Caitlin R. Tiernan, which is kind of about kind of elder gods coming down from space. But again, this has got a central investigator character who's investigating these weird goings on. So I preferred the Cassandra Khaw book slightly, but both of them were entertaining reads. Okay, next then, so for my ongoing read through of Patricia Highsmith's work, which I'm doing with Anne again from Anne Novella. We read The Suspension of Mercy. This was really good. I really, really enjoyed this one. I nearly gave this book 5 stars, but I didn't quite. So this is a book about a young couple living in England. The guy is American and the woman is English, and they have a kind of a bit of a fractious relationship. He's a writer, and he, through some of his writings, kind of fantasizes about what it would be like to bump off his wife, basically. And you then get this plot developing where the wife goes away, and like people start to doubt whether she's gone away or whether he has actually bumped her off. And to the extent that I found myself at points in this book like questioning my own memory of what had happened, and there's this wonderful suspension of like reality almost, where you just don't quite know what's going on. A really, really enjoyable one from Highsmith. Her books are always good, but this one in some ways was more fun than some of the other ones, and also has a fantastic character that the guy creates. So this writer writes these like TV plays basically, and he creates this character, the name of whom now escapes me. I think he's called the Whip, who's like a supervillain. So you get like lots of kind of his outlines for stories about the Whip, which I really, really enjoyed. I'd love someone to start writing fan fiction about that character. So yeah, this was very, very entertaining. Right, where are we? Next up then was another buddy read I did. So this time with one of my patrons, Scott. So in theory, I do one buddy read a month with one of my patrons. In reality, I ended up, I think one got carried over from last month, and we just, diaries couldn't quite align. So I ended up doing 3 in a month. But it was really fun. So it was the final one I did this month. So this was Sister Maiden Monster by Lucy A. Snyder, which is an interesting kind of pandemic style book, albeit not about the COVID pandemic, about another pandemic that infects people and ends up sending some people like homicidally insane. And again, it's kind of got Lovecraftian themes to it. It's told in 3 separate parts, which are kind of interlinked stories, and it's not as effective as I felt it could have been. Some of the ideas in this book are really good, and some of the set pieces, which are, you know, very graphically violent and often quite graphically sexual as well, are quite impressive. But overall, it just didn't quite hang together for me as a book. So a bit of a missed opportunity, I felt. I felt like it could have been better. Right, next then, another Victorian book. So it occurred to me, whilst I wasn't doing Victober, and Victober, if you don't know, is an event takes place every October where people read Victorian books. So I wasn't intending to do Victober, but I ended up reading Dracula and The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, both of which are Victorian. And I think I think I did look up whether Carnacki the Ghost Finder was Victorian or not, and I think it wasn't quite, but it's got a kind of Victorian vibe to it anyway. So yes, The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, which I read for the Classics Company project, which is run by Micah Cummins and Anne Novella. So this is really fun. I've read a couple of other Wilkie Collins books and really enjoyed them. I didn't enjoy this one quite as much as The Woman in White, which I think is my favourite Collins, but I definitely like Collins more than Dickens. I think Collins is much more entertaining. So this is a mystery, often considered to be the first English mystery, about a diamond, the Moonstone, that goes missing, and various people trying to figure out what's going on with it. Like Dracula, it's told in there's kind of diary entries and letters and things like that, and told from multiple perspectives, and it's a fun book. I enjoyed parts of it more than others, but overall a really, really entertaining mystery. It's longer than it needed to be. It's 600 pages, and I couldn't help feeling that part of the reason it's so long is it was originally published as a serial in a magazine that Collins, I think, co-edited, and there's definitely padding in here, but I can imagine the experience of reading it in that serial form, getting a new instalment every week or whatever, would have been hugely enjoyable. And it's one of those things where the mystery in it is so entertaining. I can imagine people who are reading it like discussing it and trying to figure out what's going on, a bit like people do with with TV shows nowadays. So yeah, a really fun book, an example of how older fiction can be purely entertaining. We tend to think, and I'm sure have said this on the channel, that older books can be a bit stuffy sometimes, but this was fun, as was Carnacki the Ghost Finder and Dracula. So there you go. I've read 3 100-year-old plus books this month, all of which were really, really entertaining. Okay, next then, as part of my Stephen King project, where I'm reading all the Stephen King books I haven't read yet, I read From a Buick 8, which was not a lot of fun. I keep saying books are a lot of fun in this episode, don't I? Not necessarily a lot of fun, but interesting. So this is a book, and again, I've done a full review of it, which is not up on the channel yet, but will be up on the channel. I think will be up on the channel by the time this video goes up, perhaps, or around during the same week anyway. So this is a book about a group of state troopers who discover this weird car that is clearly not a normal car, and them trying to figure out what's going on with it. So they store it at their barracks, and like weird stuff happens. So like weird creatures emerge from it, and all sorts of strange stuff is going on. But it's told as a series of chapters where people tell stories about things they've witnessed happening with the car, to a young guy who's like hangs out at the barracks because his dad was previously a trooper who worked with the rest of them, who died, and he's trying to kind of reconnect with his dad through working there and chatting to the people who work there. So yeah, it was good. It was good. I enjoyed it more than I expected to, and I ended up thinking that whilst for long sections of it, it kind of feels a bit plotless, I thought King did a good job at the end of pulling everything together. So yeah, it was an entertaining read. Okay, next then, something very different from the 1970s, CB Angel by Lauri Adcock, which is kind of a slightly weird mix of like men's adventure style story and like buddy comedy about these two truckers who get involved with gangsters and stuff like that, and also with this character, the CB Angel, who's this mysterious woman who kind of tips them off to danger and things like that over the CB radio. So a thriller written to cash in on the public interest in CB radio in the 70s. This copy was sent to me by Roy from the channel Roy Reads Anything. I will be sending it on to MJ from Reading This Life. So we're doing this kind of cursed book tour with it, where it will travel around various booktubers and be read and commented on. So yeah, a fun slice of kind of 70s cheese, basically. I had a good time with it. Right, next then, again for Occult Detective October, I read Occult Detective Magazine issue 10. I've done a review of this on the channel, so you can have a look at that if you want more information about it. But this is a great magazine that collects together, occult detective stories and articles about the genre, and all the occult detective books I've talked about so far are kind of represented in here, if that makes sense. So all the different styles, so Victorian style stuff, modern stuff, stuff with Lovecraftian elements. The whole world of occult detective fiction is here, and really entertainingly done. So I had a very good time reading this one. Right, we're nearly there. So next then, again for Occult Detective October, so these were for the final week, the Anything Goes week. I read The Dresden Files Book 1, Stormfront by Jim Butcher, which I didn't enjoy at all. So I was expecting to have fun with this, but I just found it, I don't know, slightly annoying and not very engaging. So a long-running and beloved series. So loads of people really like these books, about this character, Harry Dresden, who's a wizard who lives in a kind of an America where there's like magic stuff going on as well, and solves mysteries and things. So it sounds like the sort of thing I might quite enjoy, but I really didn't enjoy it at all, I'm afraid. That was my least favourite book of the month, definitely. Straight after that, I read a similar book which I enjoyed a lot more. So this is Necrot Town by Alexander Nader, the first of the Mountain City Chronicles books. So again, this is about a detective character. It's set in a world that is kind of a bit like our world, but has magic as well. And there's a mystery that he solves, but I thought the mystery in this was much better done. It was a really good mystery, and unlike the Joe Pitt book I talked about, one of the strengths of this book was that the fact that the mystery feels like it's related to the world building, if that makes sense, and the central character's kind of life too. So this was a really entertaining mixture of mystery and magic and horror, and I had a really good time with it. Right, 3 books to go. So next up then, 2 books to go. I'm very nearly at the end. So next then, we have Everything the Darkness Eats by Eric LaRocca, which was sent to me by the publisher. This was good but weird. It's really weird, and lots of people don't seem to have had as good a time with it as I did. So it's about this. Basically, there's a town where people, particularly older people, are going missing, and there's this weird character who's like basically kidnapping people, and at the start you don't know why. There's a detective in the book who's investigating these disappearances, and there's also this other character whose life has kind of been turned upside down after he had a really bad accident where his wife died, and he's been left disabled as a result of it. So there's some really interesting stuff going on, but it doesn't necessarily feel like there's strong connections between all the different storylines in it, and I think that's one of the problems people have had with it. I did think, though, that LaRocca pulled it together towards the end, definitely. And whilst I didn't love the actual ending of the book, I thought it was interesting, and there's some quite nice writing in here, and there's some really good imagery and things like that. And it's one of those books where it just has kind of stuck with me since I finished it in a way I hadn't necessarily anticipated it would. It was one where when I turned the final page, I sort of thought to myself, I can't quite decide if I really like this book or didn't like it. And the more it sat with me, the more I've decided I liked it. So I thought it was good. The final thing then, I did read, but I didn't like, was Black House by Stephen King and Peter Straub. So my second Stephen King book of the month. This was just a slog. I mean, look how big it is. It was always going to be a long book, but King often is capable of pulling off long books and not making them feel like long books, or at least making you feel rewarded for the effort you put into reading them. But this one just didn't work for me. So the sequel to The Talisman I really liked. So the central character of The Talisman, Jack, who's a kid in The Talisman, is now grown up and is a detective and has been involved in solving some crimes that took place in this small town, and then ends up living in the small town. And then weird stuff starts happening in the small town. So kids start disappearing. There's this serial killer character called the Fisherman going round. So he kind of ends up investigating that stuff, and there end up being connections to the Talisman. And in the Talisman, Jack travels to this weird like other world, this other Earth called the Territories, and kind of has adventures there. So the problem I had with this was I just kept on getting confused by what was going on. Was part of the problem. But the other problem is that it felt like King, and I suspect it was King rather than Straub, wouldn't let this book just be a Talisman book. So I really liked The Talisman. I thought it was a fun kind of fantasy adventure type book with some scary stuff in it too. And this book feels like it could have been a really successful sequel to that, but King insists on making it a Dark Tower book. So there's loads of Dark Tower stuff woven into this book, and I felt like that diluted from the stuff I'd enjoyed about The Talisman. So yeah, unsuccessful for me, I'm afraid. I really found it a slog to get through. I did manage to finish it, but it was a struggle. Now, funnily enough, in November I've started reading a Dark Tower book, The Wolves of the Calla, book 5, and I'm really, really enjoying that far more than I enjoyed this. So anyway, yeah, a bit of a dud for me, I'm afraid, and probably my second least favourite book of the month after the Harry Dresden book. Right, so that's everything I read then. So what was my book of the month then? So it was a bit difficult, and I've ended up with 2, and it's really close. So I think my runner-up for book of the month is Suspension of Mercy, which I just thought was really, really enjoyable and a really clever psychological thriller, but that managed, psychological thrillers can so often be dark and dull. Well, not dull, but you know what I mean, serious. Whereas this was twisted and fun. So yeah, really enjoyed that. But my favourite book of the month is Dracula. So just an absolute classic, and not hard to see, on rereading it, why it is so well respected and such a foundational work in the horror genre. Just fantastic, absolutely fantastic. If you haven't read it, you really should, and I'm convinced you will find it easier to read than you expect. So that was my October. Lots of good horror stuff for spooky season, but some other stuff as well. Really enjoyed Occult Detective October, so thanks again to MJ for creating the event and for asking me to be part of it. I had a really great time. So yeah, hope you all had good spooky Octobers too. Do let me know in the comments what you've been reading. Let me know if you've read any of the things I talked about. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.